This is Land of Havilah, Isaiah 42. The first 17 verses are a prophecy of the Messiah. The next 8 verses are a closing statement that Israel's deaf and blind. So the question is, who'll pay attention to this prophecy, and who'll pay attention to the Messiah himself when he comes? Verse 1. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen in whom my soul delights. I put my spirit on him. He'll bring justice to the nations. He'll not shout, nor raise his voice, nor cause it to be heard in the street. He won't break a bruised reed. He won't quench a dimly burning wick. He'll faithfully bring justice. He'll not fail nor be discouraged until he's set justice in the earth, and the islands will wait for his law. Thus says God Yahweh, He who created the heavens and stretched them out, He who spread out the earth and that which comes out of it, He who gives breath to its people and spirit to those who walk in it. I, Yahweh, have called you in righteousness and will hold your hand and will keep you and will make you a covenant for the people as a light for the nations, to open the blind eyes, to bring the prisoners out of the dungeon and those who sit in darkness out of the prison. I am Yahweh, that is my name. I'll not give my glory to another, nor my praise to engraved images. Behold, the former things have happened, and I declare new things. I tell you about them before they come up. Comment in verse 1, Behold my servant. Coming in verse 19, there's a servant who's blind and deaf, which is plainly Israel, but the servant in verse 1 is completely opposite. The Father delights in him, puts his Spirit on him, and chose him. This servant will bring justice to the nations. He's obviously Jesus. We know that for the last 2,000 years, Jesus has been bringing justice to the nations through his teachings, but in his second coming, he'll not just teach, but enforce justice. He'll bring justice to the nations, as verse 1 says. In verse 2, quote, He'll not shout, nor raise his voice, nor cause it to be heard in the street, end quote. In the Gospels, Jesus didn't preach in the streets. He preached in the synagogues, the temple, the countryside, in homes, and in private, but not the streets, even one time. He was low-key and avoided self-promotion, for example, by telling people not to make their healings known, Matthew 12:15-21. He drew attention because of his power, not because he shouted for attention. And verse 3, quote, He won't break a bruised reed, he won't quench a dimly burning wick, end quote, which means he'll be gentle. He didn't stone the woman caught in adultery. She was a bruised reed he didn't break. She was a dimly burning wick he didn't snuff out. He only told her to go her way and sin no more. And verse 4, quote, He'll not fail nor be discouraged until he set justice in the earth, and the islands wait for his law, end quote. Jews today reject that Jesus could be the Messiah, citing the scripture that the Messiah will rule the world, and pointing out that obviously Jesus didn't rule the world. But in verse 4, Jesus will not fail nor be discouraged until he set justice in the earth. The Father has said to him, Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet, Psalm 110:1. So right now we're in a waiting period, but his rule is coming. He'll set justice in the earth. In verse 6, Yahweh says to the Messiah, I'll make you a light for the nations. Nations there being the Hebrew word goyim again, which means all nations or Gentile nations. He'll be the light of the world, in other words, which turned out to be the case. In verse 6, Yahweh will make him a covenant for the people. Whereas the old covenant was in Moses, the new covenant is in Jesus, Luke 22:20. In verse 7, the servant will open blind eyes. No prophet until Jesus had ever healed the blind, John 9:32. His healing of the blind was one more confirmation that he was the Messiah as predicted in the Scripture. Also, according to verse 7, he brought prisoners out of the dungeon and those who sit in darkness out of the prison. He did so for the apostles, bringing them out of prison in the middle of the night, and he released Peter and Paul from prison in the middle of the night, all in the book of Acts, literally fulfilling this prediction. But the prediction is also metaphorical, that he frees us from all sorts of quandaries, from darkness, from sin, and so forth, not just literal jails. The list is too long of all the things he frees us from. In verse 8, God puts his signature to this prophecy of the Messiah, quote, I am Yahweh, end quote, which means if he signed it, he'll get it done. In verse 9, Yahweh says, the former things have happened, meaning you ought to know by now my prophecies come to pass. I've already fulfilled many of them, and I'll fulfill this prophecy of the Messiah just like the others. The next 8 verses are more focused on the second coming. Verse 10. Sing to Yahweh a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth, you who go down to the sea and all that is therein, the islands and their inhabitants. Let the wilderness and its cities raise their voices with the villages that Kedar inhabits. Let the inhabitants of Selah sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Comment in verses 10 and 11, sing a new song, all the earth, because something's coming that's worth singing about. Kedar and Selah are a foreign nation and city that don't worship Yahweh, but they are descendants of Abraham. They should sing because something good is coming. The good thing is that the Messiah will come to rule. Verse 12. Let them give glory to Yahweh and declare his praise in the islands. Yahweh will go out like a mighty man. He'll stir up zeal like a man of war. He'll raise a war cry. Yes, he'll shout aloud. He'll triumph over his enemies. I've been silent a long time. I've been quiet and restrained myself. Now I'll cry out like a travailing woman. I'll both gasp and pant. Comment, he came the first time gently and quietly, not even raising his voice. But the second time in verse 13, he comes like a lion, going out like a mighty man, in zeal, with a war cry, shouting aloud and triumphing over his enemies. In verse 14, he's been silent a long time, quiet and restrained, but no more. He'll come screaming and panting like a woman in labor. What are his intentions? Verse 15. I'll destroy mountains and hills and dry up all the herbs. I'll make the rivers islands and will dry up the pools. I'll bring the blind by a way they don't know. I'll lead them in paths that they don't know. I'll make darkness light before them and crooked places straight. I'll do these things and will not forsake them. Those who trust in engraved images, who tell molten images, you're our gods, will be turned back. They'll be utterly disappointed. Comment in verse 15, he'll destroy mountains and hills, scorch all their herbs, and dry up the rivers and pools. He'll be radical and destructive, but at the same time it'll be something to sing about. It must be that he'll destroy evil, and we don't have to worry that he'll destroy anything good. In verse 16, he'll lead the blind, enlighten them, and straighten the crooked places. We have a saying in English about straightening things out, which means to resolve issues or do repairs, and this is probably along the same line. He'll resolve world issues and make repairs, especially in the sense of righting wrongs. In verse 17, his arrival won't be good for everyone. Idolaters will be utterly disappointed. Now the last 8 verses concerning Israel's blindness to all this. Verse 18. Hear, you deaf, and look, you blind, that you may see. Who is blind but my servant? Or who is as deaf as my messenger whom I send? Who's as blind as he who's at peace, and as blind as Yahweh's servant? Comment in verse 19, Israel is God's failed messenger. They were supposed to be obedient to the law of Moses, in which case Yahweh would have blessed them unbelievably, and they'd be a shining example of what it's like to be wise, understanding, and close to God, Deuteronomy 4, 5-8. But they were deaf and blind and failed. They were an example of throwing away their covenant with God and suffering for it. They were at peace in verse 19, meaning they had peace with God. They had a covenant with God, but they didn't keep it. God became adversarial to them, as he promised he would, if they didn't keep the covenant, Deuteronomy 28, 15-68. Still speaking of Israel being blind and deaf to God, verse 20. You see many things, but don't observe. His ears are open, but he doesn't listen. It pleased Yahweh for his righteousness' sake to magnify the law and make it honorable. Comment, God was pleased to deliver the law of Moses to them, which was very good and honorable, but, verse 22. But this is a robbed and plundered people. All of them are snared in holes, and they're hidden in prisons. They've become captives, and no one delivers, and a plunder, and no one says, restore them. Comment, rather than being faithful to the law and wildly successful as Yahweh intended, Deuteronomy 28, 1-14, Israel is a failure. They're robbed, plundered, snared, hidden in prisons, and captive. Since they're so deaf and blind to God, verse 23. Who is there among you who'll give ear to this? Who'll listen and hear for the time to come? Comment, in answer to the question, we know now that not many in Israel would give ear to this prophecy of the Messiah. And when he came, not many listened. In the coming verse, Jacob, which is Israel, is plunder, meaning he's lost everything, verse 24. Who gave Jacob as plunder and Israel to the robbers? Didn't Yahweh, he against whom we've sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, and they disobeyed his law. Therefore he poured the fierceness of his anger on him, and the strength of battle, and it set him on fire all around, but he didn't know, and it burned him, but he didn't take it to heart. Comment: Israel went down in flames in verse 25 because they sinned against Yahweh in verse 24, and he gave them as plunder. This is not to pick on Israel, because Yahweh addressed the Gentiles in this chapter as well and commanded them to listen, but many don't. Isaiah 43 is next.